Well, hello everybody. So I'm here today with my new bestie, Tessa D'Errico. And Tessa, what are you drinking?
Water from the Brita in my apartment.
Filtered water, it's very important. I actually thought a little bit about what I was going to drink today because I'm typically a red wine drinker, but you're in just like theme of your book made me feel very nostalgic for the college days. And I drank a lot of rosé in college, and I didn't have rosé, but I did have white wine. So that's my second best. So I have a glass of white wine. So cheers. Thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to hear about your journey to writing.
Thank you for having me.
So you're an indie author. Your debut novel released summer of 2023. And then your next book is going to be coming out. Is it this year or next year?
This year, if all goes well, in the fall. It's like September. I'm aiming for September.
Okay, so September 2024. And it's following that same sort of friend group, an individual in that friend group from the first book. And you're also a college student. You're majoring in theater.
Yeah, I'm double majoring in theater and English, so.
Theater and English, okay.
Great career options there. Great stable fields to go into.
Yeah, that's actually the thing that I've been curious the most about is if you could talk a little bit about what that transition looked like, or maybe it wasn't even a transition, like maybe you came into college knowing you wanted to do writing and theater, but if you could just talk a little bit about your college experience.
Yeah, so I actually started college as I was double majoring in theater and this political science program that my school has, an honors program. It's really like structured. And I thought I wanted to do like political science. I thought I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to like work on the Hill, be a Hill turn, you know. That was what I really wanted from my life. And then I came to school and I was a freshman in the fall of 2020. All of my classes were online, but I was still in the dorms. You know, we had to get to-go food from the caf. We didn't have to, but like most of the time we did. And you had to like make a reservation online to go anywhere on campus. And, you know, it was a really weird year. So sometimes I'm like, I don't know if my life ended up this way because like I had such a weird freshman year or just because it was like meant to be. I like to think it was just meant to be. But during all of my classes for this political science program, I was just like, I would rather be reading right now. And I had started writing again. Have always been like into writing. I've always wanted to write, but towards the end of my freshman year, I really started working on something. I was like, I actually think I have something here. Why am I in this political science program? And so over the summer, I dropped it. Then I picked up the English major. So I've always had the theater with me, but yeah, the English was a decision that came to me after my first year.
So in high school, was it like you did creative writing or like were writing in your journal and you found joy in it, but you really thought you had a role in politics or you liked law? Or like how did you make that decision to go into political science instead of English from the start?
I never really thought that writing would be a career for me. And if it was, I always assumed it was something that I could return to later in life. And I never really thought about studying English in school because I was like, well, you know, if I'm in this political science program, like it would give me things to write about, you know, like I want to be a well-rounded person. I want to have more experiences. Like I don't want to just be one thing. I don't want to always be like the artsy theater and English kid, but like that's who I am. And it took me a while to be like, I had a great conversation via email with one of my first year professors of one of my gen ed classes because we had to talk to him about like what we wanted to do. And I was like, I think I kind of want to go to law school. And he was like, if you kind of want to go to law school, you don't want to go to law school. You have to be so passionate about it. You have, like, it's not easy. And if you kind of maybe want to go, you just shouldn't. And I was like, you know, he's probably right.
Yeah, I think, and maybe it's not always clear actually how transferable those skills are. Like maybe what I'm hearing you say is that you maybe were interested in a little bit of like policy or like written law, which that actually, it translates quite well because like I'm a graduate student in psychology and I have to do a lot of academic writing in which I'm conveying a story that I'm creating about my data. And I have to convey that to a variety of different audiences and tell a story about why I think some certain like phenomena is happening. And to be able to construct a clear, cohesive story like that, even though it's about science, is or, you know, it could be something like about policy or some written law or something like that, actually translates to creative stories as well, because I think the foundation of a really good story is being able to tell a story from point A to point B and do it where you can, like, if you have all these side plots and all these different characters and things, and especially if you have, like, you know, a lot of depth, like, to be able to do that and dig into those things while keeping people on the plot line. Like, I think that skill actually transfers quite well. So while maybe it seems like, wow, she went from political science to English, like, that's such a stark contrast. Like, those types of skills actually, I think, are quite transferable in that regard.
Yeah, no, totally. And there is a lot of overlap. There's a lot of people still in that program that are double majors in English that I'm friends with and have classes with. And I'm always like, we're two sides of the same coin. Like, we, you know, just like a Venn diagram.
Do any of them know about your writing journey?
Yeah, I don't talk about it too much, but in my creative writing classes, like, it's kind of hard to not talk about, you know, when, especially like my professor's like, oh, like, you know, how, like, well, he would be like, what are you guys working on right now? And I'd be like, my second book. And then I have to, you know, admit that there was a first book to say that. So it's kind of hard, especially, and I do, like, my pen name is my legal name, so it's not super difficult to find me. And sometimes people, like my good friends, will be like, oh, I had class with someone, and they asked me if I was the person you were referencing in your acknowledgments, because they saw me on your Instagram and put together that we were friends. And I was like, that's kind of cool. A little weird, but, like, really cool.
That's so interesting. I have so many thoughts about that. The first thing I wanted to ask, though, is, like, did you ever submit anything from No Coincidences, like, for a class assignment?
No, but I've submitted stuff from the second book for creative writing, because my school actually didn't have full-time creative writing faculty until this year. So before that, the only creative writing class I'd taken was creative nonfiction. At that point, most of the book was done. And then also, like, creative nonfiction, I was, like, generating new stuff and nonfiction. And so, but then last semester, my professor was like, oh, like, if you guys are working on something, you can submit it for, like, we had, like, weekly short stories. And he was like, I don't want this class to stop you from working on something that you want to be working on. So, like, you can start submitting stuff from your other projects. And I was like, cool. So I did that. And then this semester, I'm taking another class from the same professor, and it's novel writing. So the whole concept of the class is, if you can finish the first draft of a novel by the end of the semester, you pass. But if you can't, you fail the class. So now I'm actually working on book 2 in, like, the context of that class, which is fun.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you gotten any feedback about that, like, from your professor?
He liked my pitch. He was actually on a book tour, like, the past 2 weeks for his book. So we haven't had class, and he hasn't looked at some of the stuff we turned in yet because he's been traveling. But yeah, I pitched it in class, and he was like, good. He's very like he was makes fun of me for writing, like, YA books, but I was like, oh, that wasn't too, like, YA sounding. He was like, no, that sounds really good. And I was like, I did it. I got him.
Wow. That has to be so validating.
It is.
Wait, this is really smart, actually, because, like, you don't really have a need to bring on, like, an editor or anything. Like, you have a professional of sorts.
Right, I know. I'm like, yeah, and then it's also nice to have all my classmates' opinions. We have, like, small groups, and we're gonna, like, workshop our drafts. So I'm very thankful for my education and for, like, the English department at my school. It's been really, really great.
So do your peers, like, read young adult books like this? Like, do they already have sort of an understanding of the genre, and they're, like, you know, giddy and excited about reading something like this and have feedback that's, like, rooted in that? Or is it more so just, like, this is the way that English major, like, this is my opinion as an English major? Yeah,
I definitely think most of them have, like, experience reading YA, or at least, like, new adult romance, just because it is so popular right now. And, like, if I really would challenge someone to find an English major who doesn't read, like, contemporary fiction often. You know, there's not many people in the department who are just like, oh, I've never heard of Emily Henry or Jenny Han, you know? So they are pretty, like, well read in the genre. But then I would say, like, some of the people's books in my class, like, are okay, like I'm a 20-something writing for 20-somethings or like older teenagers. The other half is like, I'm just going to write something wild and crazy. And I'm like, this is a great dichotomy to have.
Yeah. So are most of them also working on like their own personal like works of fiction or nonfiction?
Yeah. I think everyone's doing fiction. I don't know if anyone's doing nonfiction, but yeah, it has to be 40,000 words.
But are any of them have like hopes of publishing that, or is it like, I'm doing this as a class assignment?
I don't know. Honestly, I think some of them do. And I think that the setup of the class is that we're going to learn about like ways of publishing and like writing query letters for like traditional publishing and stuff. But there are some people in it that I think are just in it for like the bit, like doing it for to say they did it. But yeah.
So where does theater play in all this? Like your theater major, where does that factor in?
Yeah, so I'm a theater major with a directing focus. So I'm directing a show right now for my senior thesis. I actually feel like directing and writing are pretty similar because you have to have a great understanding of character to do them both. And you have to have a real understanding of, like, there's this thing we used to talk about in theater with acting. It's like, you have to do the work on your character. You have to know, like, what their motivations are, why they're saying the things they're saying, where are they situated in time and place. And then you have to throw it all away because the audience doesn't want to see you working on stage to find the moment, like to find the line or to find the motivation. They want you have to be natural. So it's kind of, you do the work and then you throw it away. And I feel like that's really similar to how I write. When you're writing, you have to know, like, you have to have a deep understanding of like your own style and your tone and what your characters are doing. But you don't necessarily need to explain all of that. So I feel like that's kind of similar. You have to like understand it and then throw it away.
That's really interesting. But it seems like from the theater perspective, that's assuming the knowledge of your audience. Like your audience is going to come in understanding. Is that like you're playing on like human experience? Like these humans have experienced this situation, so they don't need to see me putting in the work to create this character. So similar with reading, is it sort of the expectation that your audience has already lived these experiences or has some sort of like grounding in what you're talking about, so you don't have to do all of the background things?
Yeah, I feel like it's like, I'm sure authors have done this, and I'm not saying I don't do it, but like no one needs to explain why like you'd be embarrassed if you tripped in front of your crush. Mm-hmm. Like you could be like, I'm embarrassed, and then you don't have to be like, I'm embarrassed because I fell in front of him and this is so embarrassing. And one time I did the same thing in middle school, and now I'm thinking of that too. Like, you can just be like, this is embarrassing, or just even be like, I started crying and I ran out of the room. You don't have to say like, I'm embarrassed, but you have to understand what your character is feeling in order to correctly convey that to the audience. But you don't have to like, it's not an essay. You don't have to defend your choices within your writing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So your interest in theater comes from a directing perspective, but it seems like you have a lot of insight into like even just conveying a story as an actor. Did you have any interest in like being on the stage?
I acted in like elementary school, middle school, and high school. And then once I came to college was when the head of the theater department was like, it was actually, I texted him to be like, hey, I'm not in that political science program anymore, because he's technically my advisor. So I was like, I just wanted to keep you in the loop as my advisor. Like, I'm still good with theater, but I'm actually not in that program anymore. And he was like, great. Have you ever thought about directing? And I was like, not really, but I'd love to. I'm interested. And he was like, awesome. I need an assistant director for the fall musical. Can you be at rehearsal on this day? And I was like, yeah, I can. And then I just totally fell in love with it and never stopped. So yeah, the directing focus is something that didn't come in to play until I came to college.
That's amazing. Do you feel like the writing passion and directing passion, like, are both of those things at the forefront of your mind? Like, how do you juggle doing both of those things? Obviously, with writing, it's a little bit easier because it's maybe baked into your curriculum a little bit. Like, that can kind of help keep you motivated to getting writing done. But do you feel the same sort of sense of passion about both of those things?
I feel like I do, at least at this point in my life. I mean, I love talking about writing and I love talking about theater. I could do them both all day. But it's just a different kind of mindset. It's hard to think about obviously when you're directing, like you're thinking about the show often, but you can't really solve 80% of your problems as a director unless you're in the room with the actors or the designers. But when you're writing, like it's more like 80% of the time you need to find the solution to the problem within yourself, and then like 20% of the time you need to talk it through with someone. So it's very like opposite. Like directing is this group effort. It's all about teamwork and collaboration, and it's great. It's like feels like something that like fuels me and gives me a lot of energy. And then like writing is what I do to like reflect and wind down. You know, it's very like fulfilling in a different way, but very not isolating. Isolating sounds like a bad word. Just like introspective.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas directing isn't.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So you said that it's like 80% your own work and then 20% feedback. And I'd love to hear about how you've incorporated sort of feedback in your writing. But maybe the best thing to do is sort of rewind and talk about how no coincidences even came to be. So if you want to talk a little bit about like where the idea came from that. You also mentioned that you had friends who were like, is this about me? Am I in this book? Is this my character? And like, maybe you did do that, just maybe not with that person. But like, yeah, how did these characters come to be?
Yeah, so I started working on it at the end of my freshman year of college. And I was always the kid who had like, I'm going to write a book, and then never finished anything. And then so over the summer I was working on it, and I was like, wait, I actually like think I'm onto something. But it was a totally different story. Like the characters all different names. The environment was they were still college kids, but the environment was really different. It was like a love triangle. It didn't really have a happy ending. You know, it was more like focused on like the girl, and like, you know, she doesn't choose either man. She chooses herself. And then, you know, that type of thing. And then I was looking at it and like thinking about it. And I was like, well, I wouldn't want to read this book. So I'm just going to write the book I would want to read. So I'm going to have a happy ending. I'm not going to put in a love triangle. I'm going to make the characters funny and messy. I'm not going to worry too much about if it should be open door, closed door. I'm not going to think about my audience right now. Like, I'm just going to write the book that I need right now. And so that's what I did. And it took me about 9 months to finish my first draft. And then I sent it to some close friends, my family. Some of my mom's friends read it and gave me feedback. I had some like beta reader questions I found online on some like random website. And so they answered some of those questions for me. And yeah, it was fun. It's not totally based on my friends. I mean, there are obviously moments that I was like, this is too funny to not include in the book. Just some snippets of conversations that are just so crazy. And it is funny because a lot of the things I wrote in the book that I hadn't experienced when I was writing it, like with my friends, I feel like I have experienced now, like having a friend who has an awful controlling boyfriend and like how that can be isolated. Like, so when I was going back and editing it, because I took a really long break between when I finished my first draft and when I really started editing it, because I just needed to not look at it for a couple months. When I started to look back at it, I was like, this is so crazy that I was writing all these things like almost a year ago. And now I can actually like reflect on them because they've happened to me. Yeah, my friends read it and were like, is this about me? And I was like, kind of, it's not, but it isn't really. But then one of my friends, my really good friends, I was like driving out of campus. I was like leaving the parking lot, and she was walking down the sidewalk and saw my car and like knocked on my window and was like, I just started your book. It's so good. Who is Reed based on? Who is he? And I said, he's no one. If he was real, I'd be dating him. He's not based on anyone. I wish he was.
I challenge somebody to give us a good book boyfriend that's based on a real person.
Right. I was like, that's part of the fun of it. Like, of course he's not a real person. That's why it's fun. Like,
he's a man created by a woman. That's why he's so incredible.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's so funny. That image is going to live in my head for a while. Your friend banging on your car window. That's great. So, but something you said actually really struck me. I was just rewinding a little bit about how you had this first book written, and you said that this is actually not a book you would want to read. And as somebody who's never really written a book themselves, I like to read a lot of books. I like to give my opinions about books, and I guess I would describe myself as a creative person. Like, I have lots of ideas in my head, but I would have not a clue about how to put them onto paper and convey them to somebody else. So how do you know, like, what is it? I just assume, I guess, that authors write books that they, either it's a story that they need to tell that thinks that resonates with people, which maybe falls a little bit more along the line of like autobiographical, versus like writing just like, nobody's written these tropes or this story in the way that I want, so I'm going to do it because it's a book that I would want to read. But what would you identify as like that first thing that you wrote? Like, was it like a glorified journal entry? Like you just felt like it was just something that was on your heart that you wanted to get out? Or like, why was it something that you don't think that other people would want to read? Like what purpose did it serve in segueing into the book it is now?
Yeah, so I had this like, I had a lot of boy problems my freshman year. Compared to the rest of my life, like it's just a lot happening in a very short time period. I just like had this idea, like this like image of like going to a college party with your guy friend who like you're kind of like talking to, flirting with, but for whatever reason, like he's not talking to you tonight. And you're just like, why is this? And so I just wrote this like party scene where this like, big friend group is at a party and, the guy and the girl aren't talking and she can't figure it out. It was in third person for some reason. I don't remember why I made that choice. I'm sure there was at the time a reason, but, and so I just had this like one idea and I think it was just too busy. I think I was trying to do too much to it. And, there were so many characters and it was, I was just writing this random scene without any introduction or context. I mean, I'm sure that was part of it. But, I was like, okay, this is kind of good. And then I put it away for a while and then I went back to it. And then I made like a 3-point outline. I was like, okay, so this happens and then this happens in the middle and this happens at the end. And then I looked at that and I was like, that's not an outline at all. I need to go deeper. And so once I tried to go deeper into it, that's when I started to realize like the story that was coming out in my outline was not at all what I had just written. And it wasn't this story of, it started, I think, as a story of like longing and like not getting what you want and like being miserable, which is probably reflected where I was at when I was writing it, like, but then once I took a step back from it, we talked a lot in my creative writing or my creative nonfiction class about navel gazing and like how sometimes you're just too close to something to write about it, especially if you're writing about yourself. Like you don't have, it's the difference between like looking down at yourself from your nose and then looking, stepping outside of yourself to see like the full picture of yourself. And so once I had some distance from my first like time sitting down at my laptop writing that in my freshman dorm, I was like, I can still write a story that's about awkward freshman year situationships, which is what I want to say, but I can have fun with it. And I can write something that I would want to read. I don't like reading things that don't have a happy ending. So I'm going to write a book with a happy ending, but I can still talk about, college party culture and situationships and awkward like encounters with your crush. And I can just have more fun with it. And so once I like had that realization, the outline just became clearer and clearer, and I just started writing.
I don't want to say profound, but it feels profound. Like I like how you explain that perspective of like looking down your nose of like, this is what my lived experience is, but removing yourself and explaining it in a different way. So if you're putting your maybe like lived experience about like roommates with controlling boyfriends or something, you're putting those experiences in the book, but the characters are not reflective of you or anyone else that you know.
Right. Yeah. It's very much like, what if this one trait my friend had was all of that they had, and that's always where it starts. It always starts a little bit like, oh, we all know this type of person. We all, if I'm going to write Halle, who's this like crazy, not crazy, but like, misguided, frazzled girl who's not good in school, it makes logical sense for the story that her roommate would be good in school, somewhat has her life together, so that they can balance each other out. So it kind of starts with like, all right, so I need someone who's organized. I need someone who knows where all the parties are. I need these people, and that's who you obviously first go to, okay, who's that for me in my life? And that's where it starts. But then the more you write about it, the more they become separate from who they originally might have been who you might have been calling to mind when you first started writing.
Yeah. I think that's a really nice way to explain it, because for the people that aren't writing books, I think that's hard to kind of wrap your mind around. Like, my best friend wrote a book, and one of the things that's in my mind is like, well, who am I? Do I play a role in this book? And it's like, well, you've kind of like inspired this character, but you're not her, or you're not this person. It's just kind of like, I took this as a leaping off point. I think that's kind of hard to really think about, is like, I've took this essence of you and these things that I think that you've brought into my life, but made you into someone that's like completely different than who you actually are. Like, they wear things you wouldn't wear, or they say things that you wouldn't say, but like, it's just kind of basing off of that lived experience. I think that's super interesting. Okay. So anything else about like where Reed or Halle are coming from, or like any particular scenes in the book that are like, this thing happened to me and this is how I wish that it had ended up? Or this, you mentioned like situationships in college, and that phrase did not exist when I was in college. But most of what I've read in your book, I've been like, either I lived that or I know somebody that lived that. It was very nostalgic for me. So is there anything else about any of these scenes or in the book that like come from like a deeper place, or something that you actually experienced?
Yeah, the scene where Reed comes over and like takes care of Halle when her and Addie are sick. Me and my roommate had COVID freshman year of college, and we had to go to like the isolation dorms, and was great. Like, we were just miserable, but since we were both sick, they let us like stay together. And then our other friend was there too, because we all went to the testing center together. And so I remember during that just being like, when my parents can't come visit me, and they're for my whole life who has taken care of me when I'm sick. My life would be, thinking at the time, like, my life would just be so much better if this guy that I was talking to, trying to get attention from, would like show that he cared about me a little bit more. Like, maybe offer to do something for me. Like, that would make my life better. And obviously it wouldn't have. Like, that doesn't change anything about circumstances. And so I think that's why I wanted to include the stuff about like the girls taking care of each other. I think a big thing that I've learned in college is you're like away from home for the first time, and like your automatic first instinct is to try to find like a partner to take care of you. But I've found that like my girlfriends in college have done so much for me, and I am so thankful for all of them. That's really great too. And like, you can emotionally mature and, be dependent on people that aren't your family relationships, without having like some crazy college love story and some like college sweetheart on the football team or whatever.
Yeah, I think maybe the girl gangs in college are a little underrated, and they don't get the credit that they deserve, because girl gangs those are some of the best memories that I have of college, or our nights spent where it's, we're just going to eat popcorn and we're just going to watch Bridesmaids or whatever silly movie is on. And then next thing you know, it's like, we're smearing off icing each other and we're super, super drunk. And it's just like, we just had a good time on a, Friday night doing absolutely nothing but staying at home and hanging out together. I think a lot of people maybe pulled that out from your book too, is that like, which is, that's awesome that that's what your intention was. And that's what was conveyed, is that like the true, genuine emotion of reflecting on how good college girlfriends can be, or just college friends can be at that time, and what a large role they play in your life. I think that's super important, and that's great that came across. So you had mentioned that your mom's friends, you had sent your book to some of your mom's friends, and I certainly would not feel comfortable sharing my college experiences with my mom. And so I'm curious, like, at what point did you write it in mind that like anybody could read this and know that like, I'm not writing this about myself, Mom, don't think I'm writing this about myself. This is not my experience. Please don't, call me every weekend concerned or whatever. Like, how did you feel about, you said you use your legal name. Like, how did you feel about your family knowing that you wrote this book and it's not just something that you've done, like in your freshman or sophomore dorm room, like writing all these things out, knowing that people are going to read it, and then also feeling comfortable like sharing it with other adults who like, they're college experience is probably a lot different than what it is now. And maybe they don't totally understand like some of the things that are in there.
Yeah. No, I remember one of my mom's friends who read it was one of her like feedback. She was like, I feel like they spend a lot of time at bars, but also like I think I did in college too, but it's been so like now that I'm not super close to that experience, it feels almost repetitive that they're like always going out, but like that's what college is. So it definitely is something that isn't going to resonate for everyone. And especially, you know, some people don't go to college or some people, I remember one of the very first reviews I got on Goodreads, because I do read my Goodreads reviews. I'm a bad author. I'm just curious. And one of the reviews was like, and like, it was interesting, but I wonder how differently the events would have played out if it was at a bigger school. And I was like, well, it's not. So, you know, it's even like if you had a different college experience than obviously I'm writing from my own experience of, you know, a liberal arts school in the Midwest that's medium sized. But, you know, if you go to some massive state school with football and frats and sororities, you might be reading the book and be like, this doesn't feel like my college experience. So it definitely is hard, you know, in that sense. Like, I didn't want my family to be like, oh, we can't read this book because it's a romance book and Tessa doesn't want us to read it. Like, I really am pretty open about it.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who went to a large state school, like I went to San Diego State for undergrad. And while we had a very large Greek life, like it's weird. It's almost like you hit a point in your life where you're like, I'm too old for this. I'm too old to be drinking jungle juice and standing in a really cramped room listening to this music. I can't talk with anyone. I'm screaming, like random people are coming up and rubbing up against me. Like I just feel too old for this. Not that the bars are that much different, but it just feels like you kind of move to that space, especially like when people turned 21, they were not on campus, like partying or even having house parties like they were. But like for the most part, it's like, okay, we're all going down to the bars. Even some people were a little ahead of that curve and were like, all right, everybody get your fake IDs. Like we're heading down to the bar down the place that like doesn't card or like, you know, believes that I'm from New York and I'm here in California. And so even as somebody who went to a state school, like I resonated with so much of the things you were saying because I would have my friend group down at the bar and a lot of these sorts of things would play out. I mean, you spend your time on campus, but that gets old really quickly and you're like, all right, I'm an adult. I'm going to go out and get into the nightlife scene, going to bars and going downtown. And yeah, I also think that if you feel like you can handle it, I guess. I think reading your Goodreads comments can be good in some ways. Like if you know what you're looking for, right? Like if you're reading it just because you're in a mood to tear yourself down and so you want to look at what your 1 or 2 stars are, then you can read them and just be like, all right, bring on the pain. Let's do it. But I think there's also like, I think I've talked about this before, which is like sometimes people just don't like the trope or the thing that you've done, and that's totally fine. Also, there might be some pieces of like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that somebody would have gotten that from my book, or I didn't realize that was that perspective that you would have had. And even if you can't really do anything about it in the moment, I think it helps give you a wider perspective as an author. Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you're not like doom scrolling on your Goodreads reviews to feel the pain, I think that it could be useful.
No, I think it is. And I'd like to think that I have a good enough sense of self that, you know, if someone leaves a review and they're like a lot of there's a couple on there that are like a lot of showing or not enough showing, a lot of telling. But that's my writing style. I write very stream of consciousness. To me, it's funnier to hear Halle's inner monologue with like a bunch of like random pop culture references and hear her be like, well, I did this thing and then I did this thing and then I did this thing and then I felt like shit after. And so I think like that's just my style and that's just the way I chose to write the book. It's not super descriptive. It's not very lyrical. So if that's what you're looking for in a book, you're probably not going to like my style of writing. And that's not, I can't change that, you know? So I like to think that I can sort through them.
So I think your book is sort of identified as like a coming of age book. And I'm wondering if your intent was for it to be in that category. And the reason that I ask this is because like your peers that are reading it or like all the college students that are currently in college reading these books maybe get something out of it that's a little bit different than like somebody like myself or somebody who's like graduated college, maybe a couple years older, has gotten out of it. And I wonder if you feel the impact of that as like it's a coming of age, but you're living that, like you're in it right now. Whereas like for me, that's very nostalgic and reflecting back on the experiences that I had in college and like seeing how, like, I don't know, there are moments like I'm a TA in graduate school. And so I interact a lot with undergraduates. And there are times where I'm like, I don't know the words that you're saying. I don't know this lingo. I feel like I don't know how to relate to you. Like it makes me feel very old. And I don't feel like I don't normally feel very old. Like I feel like I'm, you know, whatever. Like you talk to me, whatever. I have, you know, family members that are a lot younger and I don't feel that way. But I get into the university setting and I'm like, I'm 100. Like I have no idea what's going on in your life or how to relate to you. And so it was so like nostalgic and just made me feel all these really good feelings to read about somebody who's in college and writing all of these things. And it's like, wow, like that was my experience with that situation. Like things haven't changed that much, you know? And so I wonder how you feel about identifying like a coming of age where it's like, this was my lived experience from the last year. Did you recognize the impact that you would have on a target audience that is like at a much different life stage than where you were when you wrote it?
Yeah, I don't think I fully did because when I was writing it for myself and for like my friends. And, you know, I was like, okay, they'll find this reference funny because, you know, that's totally something that I joke about, or that's totally something that relates to what happened to us and like this funny inside joke we have. But then when I started like, you know, interacting with people more on social media and people saying it was nostalgic for them or that like it helped them realize something about themselves that like, you know, or about their college experience, it is weird. It's very rewarding though. People are always kind of shocked when they hear that I'm still in school. Mostly just because of like the time commitment of being an author, which then I'm like, that's why I haven't finished a first draft of book 2 yet. Like, yeah, I'm not perfect. It's not like I have like all this incredible amount of time. Like, it did take me 2 years, well, maybe like it took me like 2 full years to write, edit, and publish. No coincidences, but you know, people don't really realize that. They just see like, oh, college should publish a book. But then when people are like, oh my gosh, you're a college student, that's so crazy. Sometimes I'm just like, how could I not be? Like, that's a book that I knew when I was writing it. I was like, if I don't write this now, it's not, you know, this is a very specific time in my life. And I just wanted to like capture that. And so I was worried it would be like too nasal gazing, or like too specific. So I am really glad that it's resonated with people beyond the like 18 to 21, 22 age range.
And so when originally writing it, thinking that this will be like a fun like nod to all the people that are like your age and all of your friends and things like that, like how did you make the decision to go ahead and publish it? And when you did make that decision, like to do it by yourself and not go through like a publishing company or something like that? I'm
not a very patient person. And so once I finished it, I had like a query letter written up. I had like a list of agents to reach out to. And then I was like, well, let me just to like make sure I don't want to do like, just to double check, let me like look into self-publishing. And I was like, oh, maybe I should just do this because writing isn't my number one source of income right now. I'm still in school. I'm just doing this to see what comes of it. And I want to, you know, I am still exploring all my career options and what I want to do in life. So it kind of excited me to be like, I can market my own book and I can kind of put on all these different hats of like, I'm the writer and I'm the marketer and I'm my own PR person sometimes. And I'm my own salesperson. And so it was kind of like, you know what, this is a time in my life where I'm like, the idea of doing something that might seem on the surface more challenging, but has like more opportunities to try new things, that excites me right now. And I don't think that will excite me my whole life. So I was like, I'm going to take advantage of this now and try it out and see who gets it.
Did you have anyone that could give you advice on any of this stuff, or you kind of just figured out how to get this book into people's hands sort of on your own?
No, I kind of, I talked to a few different people that I'd like found on the internet and stuff, and none of them gave me the same answers at all. You know, and there's kind of like hybrid publishing, you know, people like recommended that. And I was like, why would I pay to, no offense if anyone's doing hybrid publishing, but like, why would I pay $2,000+ to not have control over what my cover looks like.
Sure, yeah.
Why would I do that? So, I had a lot of different opinions. And then I was just like, I'm going to do some heavy Googling. And I did. And then I just kind of trial and error, a lot of uploading the wrong cover sizes into KDP when trying to get the Kindle version up. A lot of, looking through. What I did do is I would look through other indie authors' acknowledgments for, look at their front matter and be like, oh, so like 8 of the 10 indie books I've read this month have been formatted through Vellum. Maybe I should look up Vellum and see what it is and if I can do it myself. And then I was like, okay, I can. Nice. And then I'd be like, oh, wait, these other authors are hiring freelance cover designers. Maybe I should just do that too. And just really having like a different set of, you have to have like your reader eyes and then like your author eyes and just be looking for what other people are doing.
Yeah, that's very resourceful. So like, I'm gonna read I don't know. I can't even tell you what drives me to read acknowledgement sections in books, but most of them I actually don't read. I guess if there's like a character that I'm really curious to know how this character came to be, I would read them. But yeah, there's good little tidbits in there. That's a nice hot tip for authors. So like you can read people's acknowledgement sections and they do have good advice in there. That's great.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your work in progress, what we can expect from that and how that's been going?
Totally. So the general vibe I've been pitching in class is like High School Musical / Grease meets Before Sunrise meets Haunting of Hill House. So there's a lot going on, but Isabel, who's one of Halle's friends in my first book, Isabel is a dance major. She's very focused. If you have read my first book, she's kind of cold and driven, but like a little shut off, but like not a bad friend, but she's a little odd, a little eccentric. So books is her story, and she's dealing with the loss of a family member, who she's about to like be old. Her upcoming birthday will make her older than this family, her cousin that she was close to, who recently passed away. Recently, like not like super recently, within the past 5 years. So she's dealing with that. And that's kind of caused this like weird fear of death. So she's like super on edge all the time, kind of like a hypochondriac. And so that's her cross to bear. And then she on campus runs into Cody, who was her vacation romance from summers long ago. Her family and his family had timeshares in the same week. So they grew up spending this 1 week together every summer. And, she never thought she was going to see him again. He decided to leave the country for school, but now he's back and he's on the same campus as her. And she's like, what? And he's like, yeah, well, I'm back because my dad's sick. And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, why do you have a lacrosse jersey on? And he's like, because I'm on the lacrosse team. And she's like, oh, that's so great because I literally hate lacrosse players and they are my worst enemy. So that was a very long-winded pitch. I should have just pulled the actual one up that I have written down. But yeah, so it's very, I think it's a lot weirder than my first book as far as like, right, it's very segmented. I'm trying out this thing. Who knows, by the time the book's actually done, I might like listen to this episode and be like, what was I talking about? Like, that's not what this book turned out like at all. But I've been trying to experiment with like, instead of being like, I did this on Friday night and then I had this the next morning, my mom called me on the phone or whatever, and just have Friday night end with Friday night, section break, mom calls, trying to make it more segmented, because she is like this very, her thoughts are all over the place, and I'm trying to mimic that in the writing and just make it, shorter sections, really zooming in on these smaller moments in her life, rather than writing this like sweeping plot that's like, well, at 8 a.m. I went to the caf, and then I went to class, and then I did this, and then I did that, and just trying to be a little more broken up, which I think is weirder. I don't think that's something that really I've read in contemporary romance, especially YA, at least like the rom-com realm, and I don't read a lot of like fantasy or whatever. It might be common there. I don't know. But so I feel like if you didn't like my first book, you probably won't like this one either. I don't think it's going to like sway anyone. it's definitely, I'm trying to, lean into, because I am a young writer, trying to like discover my own style, trying to try new things and see if they land. So it's exciting. It's an exciting draft to be working on.
Well, I think even if that sort of style doesn't resonate with you, I think like you as a reader, I think that like people can appreciate the fact that like this is not something trite. This is not something that's been done before. You're trying to add something fresh and something new to it. And I also think that some of my favorite books are just because I resonate so much with the inner dialogue of the character. And I'm like, this is how my brain is working. And I feel so seen by this individual. And so for you to convey that in that style of book, that this is like, choppy is not the best. Segmented is a nice way to say that, but to say that their thought process is sort of segmented and you want that to live through the way you're even telling the story. I think that's very creative. And even if that's not somebody's cup of tea, I think it's new and I think it's fresh and I think that's really interesting. And I think that's very cool to get to see that journey of you exploring how that works and having to try that out. I think that's very cool. I think that's very, very cool. And speaking of weird, this is not for anybody else but me. 100%, this is only for me. But you said something about Flowers in the Attic, and that is the weirdest thing I can think of. And it triggered this like core memory for me of reading those stories as someone that was way too young to be reading Flowers in the Attic. But like, okay, so forgive me, I've forgotten actually what the reference even. I saw Flowers in the Attic and I completely like forgot even what the post was about.
Isabel's talking to Cody and is like, oh, watch out for him. He's going to sprinkle rat poison on your donuts. And he's like, what? And she's like, it's a Flowers in the Attic reference. And he's like, oh. Okay, so how do you know about Flowers in the Attic? Because my chaotic father showed me V.C. Andrews' novels. This was even before I was even exposed to the movies. And I remember reading them like I was obsessed. I was obsessed with these books. And now as an adult, I'm like, that is a really interesting, if not disturbing thing to expose to a young child. But how did you get exposed to Flowers in the Attic? Yeah, my mom is like a V.C. Andrews fan and grew up reading it. I don't remember how, I was like very young and I don't remember how it came up. But my mom said something about Flowers in the Attic, and I was like, what is that? And she was like, oh, it's like this really like dark story about these kids who get locked in an attic, and the grandma and the mom poisoned the little boy with like rat poison on the donuts. And I remember it wasn't like a nightmare, but I had like a dream about it that night. Like I still remember like the details of the dream and like of this like idea of just sprinkling rat poison on donuts. And because it's like so genius, because it's like donuts are so innocent and like they're seen as this thing that like are like a guilty pleasure. It's kind of like, oh, I'll have a donut. And so it's just such an image that's stuck in my mind. Obviously, I so much that I dreamt about it. I honestly don't remember how old I was. But then when and so it was just something that I always had like an idea of what it was. But then when the Lifetime movies came out with Kieran and Shivka, I watched them all with my mom, because at that point I was probably middle school maybe. And I watched them all with my mom, and I was like, this is somehow so much more messed up than what you would how you would have explained it to me. I mean, the fact that they're only up there, like, sorry, I'm just going to talk about Flowers in the Attic now. The fact that they're only up there, so until they're like, oh, we have to hide you from Grandpa, and then they find out Grandpa's been dead, and Mom was just living her best life, that's so messed up. Like, that's so much worse somehow than, like, accidentally killing the boy, like the twin. Mm-hmm. Like, I just remember that reveal being like, what? That's insane.
Oh, yeah. Your mom was protecting you by just, like, coyly being like, oh, it's just this thing.
Yeah, and so I just remember being like, how is that worse than this story you told? Like, what? And then I was just obsessed with it. And so I read the V.C. Andrews books. And then when I got to college, none of my friends had heard of it. And this was like, sometimes I like tell stories about my freshman year of college and people like stare at me and I'm like, you have to remember all my classes were online and we had nothing to do, because me and my friends would consistently every night, like around midnight, we'd be like, so should we like start some movies? And we watched like 2 or 3 movies until it was 4 or 5 a.m. And then we'd go to bed and log on to our Zoom classes at 10 a.m. and still like be half asleep and then just go back to bed after class was over. It was a weird time. So anyways, there was one night where I was like, oh my God, you guys haven't heard of Flowers in the Attic. And it was streaming somewhere. And so we watched the first 3 of the Lifetime movies just back to back to back. And so I just exposed all of them to it too. And now, you know, no one can know peace. If I have to know about Flowers in the Attic, everyone has to know about it.
I love that you have like a community that you feel comfortable sharing that with, that you could show it to them. Like I remember talking with a friend about tropes we didn't really like, and I was saying, you know, like I don't think I could ever read like a mafia romance, or somebody had read Credence recently, and I was like, that seems like maybe crossing a line for me, and I don't know if I had said the word or like of what Flowers in the Attic is sort of, or at least the second book is sort of foundational on, of like brother sister situation or something. Something triggered this, and I was like, this feels like a fever dream. And as the more I thought about it, I was like, oh my gosh, I literally used to be obsessed with this series of books. I had seen all of the movies. Flowers in the Attic, this is wild. And that's the last time I thought about it. And then I saw your post and you had said something, you had referenced Flowers in the Attic. And I was like, there are others. This is not a fake book. This is not a fake show. There are other people that know about this and can verify that this was a part of my upbringing. Like, this is wild. That is a wild, like if you think about it in the context of like whatever the heck it's supposed to be, I don't even know what genre it really fits in. It's like kind of mystery, like
doesn't have a genre. It's obviously geared towards young women, I think, because based on VC other material, but then you're like, what?
Yeah, like VC Andrew was just like, I don't really care who's reading it, but I'm writing it and it's going to be amazing. And just to find somebody else in the universe who had also read that and seen those movies, I was like, wow, this is crazy. It felt like a Mandela effect sort of situation. Like I just have lived in this by myself. Nobody else knows about this. Yeah, that's my favorite. I feel like our parents would be friends. The fact that your mom is reading V.C. Andrews, I love that so much.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's also just interesting. I feel like when we talk about, we as in like the literary community talk about, like open door romance and this whole thing that like, some books are, because of like their covers and the way they're marketed, young girls are reading it and not realizing what the contents are. And it's really like those conversations that made me think like, what's the difference between like a spicy book talk book and Flowers in the Attic? Like what, they're both kind of cover the same like scandalous material. And it's so different. It's, it's like a reflection of the world we're living now, but it's also, I think, just a reflection of the way, like, things are written. I don't think that, what are their names? Chris and Kathy? Are those the brother, sister, husband, wives?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think that, like, you have to buy into the book enough to, like, somewhat be interested in reading about Chris and Kathy, but I don't ever remember, like, shipping them. Like, it's like scandalous material, but I don't think it's written in a way that it's like encouraged. I don't know. It's just interesting to think about.
Yeah, she's like a literary genius, and it's so true because even, I mean, at any age, once you have like full consciousness, you're like, well, that's wrong. Like, I don't even have to have siblings to know that's wrong. But like the way she set this up is that's not how it is in the beginning. This is just you feel a lot of sympathy for their situation, that by the times you get to book 2 and 3, you're just kind of like, they're just really trying to get by. And then if you take a step back and look at it, you're just like, what did I just read? Like that is the most insane to come in and think these are the tropes I'm going to include in my book. Like, I feel like if you talk to anyone, they would be like, I'm sorry, how are you going to market that? Who is your audience?
Yeah, who's your reader? But so many readers. Yeah.
We need to start a VC Andrews fan club because I feel like there's a community of us that are all just like...
There has to be. I mean, it's at the bare minimum, someone else has seen a rerun on Lifetime of Flowers in the Attic. Even if they like, there has to be others.
If that's you and you're listening, we're here to tell you that there are books. There's more.
Yeah, there's a whole rabbit hole to go down. And hey, if you go to any half-price books and you go to like, I don't know, I don't even know where her books are section, but that's where I got all mine. There is a DC Andrews library at any used bookstore, I promise you. So if you want to get into it, check your local used bookstore.
Yeah, if it's not in romance, it's maybe in like miscellaneous.
Might be in like horror. I don't even remember.
Yeah, that would not surprise me. Well, speaking of marketing a book, where can people find No Coincidences, and where can people find more information about what you're working on?
Yeah, so you can follow me at Tessa D'Errico author on Instagram and TikTok, and I have links and everything everywhere for my books. You can find them on Amazon. No Coincidences is on Kindle Unlimited. And also, if you are an Ohio girl or person, if you're an Ohio reader, you can find paperbacks of my book in Black Cat Books in Medina, Ohio. And just today, I went and to go see it, so it's on my mind. But it's in Joseph Beth in Cincinnati. So yeah, other than that, you can, it's widely distributed. So if you have a local indie bookstore that you can find it, search on their website and get it shipped to you. I encourage you to do that. But otherwise, it's Kindle Unlimited, and ebook and paperback are on Amazon as well.
Yes, well, you definitely should. No Coincidences gives you all the feelings. Thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me. This is so much fun.
Thank you for having me. I loved talking to you.